Little House on the Prairie was one of the most successful TV shows in history, running 9 seasons from 1974 to 1982. The NBC TV series centered on the Ingalls family, based on the true stories of Laura Ingalls Wilder. Laura was played by Melissa Gilbert and Sister Mary by Melissa Sue Anderson. Young Sister Carrie was played by twin actresses Lindsay and Sydney Bush. Aside from the fictionalized account of the series, the Ingalls were real people. Michael Landon looked nothing like the real-life Charles Ingalls, nor did Karen Grassley resemble Ma from the TV show, who was named Carolyn. We were surprised on a recent trip to Keystone, South Dakota to see billboards advertising the Carrie Ingalls collection at the Keystone Museum. Naturally, we were curious about that and went up the hill to the museum, located inside the former Keystone Schoolhouse built in 1899. We learned that Carrie Ingalls was a resident of Keystone, going by the name of Carrie Swansea after marrying David Swansea. This is an old schoolhouse. It housed 40 students, if you can believe that.
They fit 40 students in it.
Early 1890s. 8 grades were housed in here. And it looks like they brought this in here in October 2003, lifted it into place. And what brought us here is this old school building. And we understand there's some Carrie Ingalls memorabilia inside.
This old playground equipment can't possibly be from back then.
No.
But it's pretty old.
She's talking about this modern stuff.
Anybody who knows, going down those metal slides burn.
Especially in the summertime.
Yeah.
Keystone School and Museum, built in 1899. On the National Register of Historic Places. And that's a portable compressor. That's just a compressor for tools. Keystone School was built between 1899 and 1901. Located on the hillside overlooking the booming gold town, it was a very large and impressive building with Victorian architecture, which made Keystone community of more than 2,000 residents very proud. It had 300 students, the first enrollment in 1901.
I guess the biggest piece in our collections is actually this little figurine here.
What is this?
So this is supposedly the China Shepherdess, which that was the figurine that their mother received when she was a little girl. And it traveled everywhere they went. It was the first thing they unpacked and they put on the mantelpiece or the shelf that Pa built for it, and it represented home to them.
It says, we believe the evidence supports that this could be the figurine. A prized possession inside the museum is this clock, which was owned by Carrie. It was a fond reminder of her father, who used the violin to entertain the family while she was growing up. Carrie was 32 years old when her father passed away. Behind the glass of this display cabinet is beadwork done by Mary Ingalls, who lost her eyesight at the age of 14, as well as books and other family heirlooms. This little artifact is a piece of siding removed from the house of Grace Ingalls in Manchester, South Dakota. Here's a set of little house books. Carrie was Laura's only immediate family member that lived to see all the books published. Grace passed away before these happy golden years were published. And I see you have a lot of stars from the show.
Yep, some of the actresses and actors come back for Carrie's birthday celebration.
Okay, well, it's a very nice museum.
There's some signed memorabilia from the stars of the TV show. They actually come here for reunions. Carrie Ingalls was born as Carolyn Celestia Ingalls and lived in Keystone from 1911 until her death in 1946. Carrie Ingalls Swansea was described as small, thin, and frail, and suffered the most of all the Ingalls through the deprivations of the hard winter of 1880-1881. The children of Charles and Carolyn Ingalls were, in order of birth, Mary Amelia Ingalls, born in 1865 and dying in 1928, Laura Elizabeth Ingalls Wilder, born in 1867 and dying in 1957, Carolyn Carrie Celestia Ingalls Swansea, born in 1870, passing away in 1946. Infant Charles Frederick Ingalls, who was born in 1875 and passed away the following year. And Grace Pearl Ingalls Dow, who was born in 1877 and passed away in 1941. Carrie lived in a number of places as a child after her birth in Kansas in 1870. Charles Ingalls moved his family to Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa before arriving in De Smet, South Dakota in 1879. It would be home for the next 26 years and where Carrie spent her teen years. Carrie attended and graduated from high school in De Smet, and in this 1887 photo is seen in the front row, second from right. She graduated in 1888, and in this class photo, Carrie is in the front center. At the age of 35, she struck out on her own, employed as a newspaper manager and typesetter. Printer's binding press used by Carrie. She worked for the Keystone Recorder newspaper. Building is now gone. During her late teen years, Carrie was employed as a typesetter for the De Smet News and subsequently other newspapers throughout the state. The Keystone Museum collection includes many possessions of Carrie, including some jewelry pieces that once belonged to her.
In one of the novels, Laura mentions it.
This piece was mentioned? And what is it, just a ceramic thing?
The boy with the brown dog.
That's actually mentioned in one of her books. Do you know which one?
You know, I don't actually.
That's a boy and a brown dog. It's hard to actually see it. Wow.
Now, Carrie was also in the Order of the Eastern Star, and they actually met upstairs in this building here. She was secretary. She served as secretary for a very long time in the Order of the Eastern Star. So these are some of her notes of meetings.
Okay. That's all her handwriting?
Yes, sir.
So her last name was
Swansea.
Swansea, yeah.
Swansea. There's her signature right there.
Yep, and she did not marry until she got to Keystone here, actually.
Okay.
1912.
That's neat. She settled in Keystone in 1911. In 1912, she married widower David N. Swansea, best remembered for his part in the naming of Mount Rushmore. She became the stepmother to Swansea's two children, Mary and Harold. Harold was one of the workers who helped carve Mount Rushmore. He was killed in a crash in Keystone on April 9th, 1938. David also died in 1938.
That is the meeting book from the early meetings of the fire department here, and it's open to the page where Carrie was actually at a meeting that she donated land for the first department to be built on. Here she was receiving her 50th year membership pin of the Order of the Eastern Star.
Just taken weeks before her death, huh? How old was she?
75.
Okay. Pa Ingalls hymnal right here. And here's a reproduction of his signature at the top and a neighbor. Charles Ingalls, the real Charles Ingalls. Carrie was never the picture of health and moved about the country in search of a more comfortable climate, including Boulder, Colorado, and Madison, Wyoming. Okay, so that's the house here in Keystone where Carrie lived, and unfortunately, this is what happened to it in 1977. Carrie's house, before it burned in 1977, was located on Keystone's Main Street. The house was situated in this approximate area, and after comparing photos, appears to have been left of the Turtletown ice cream shop, now a stone's throw from the 1880 train depot. So what was this room? One of
So
the classes?
This room here was actually the last classroom that was used when this was a school, and that was 1988. So it held a class of about 8 kids that was K through 5.
Wow. You remember reading them all?
Mm-hmm.
What grade were you in?
I don't remember. I just remember being young, but I read a lot. And I recognize all of the covers of those.
Sarah
But
was
then I-
pointing this one out.
Yeah,
Have you read that one?
Confessions of a Prairie Bitch. No. It's fair. Do you see how I survived Nellie Olson and learned to love being hated? And that'd be hard to survive the...
Yeah. I think she had stories of people throwing stuff.
Yeah, well, probably a bit easier back then than nowadays with social media. You just get destroyed.
After their mother Carolyn died in 1924, Carrie and Grace took care of their blind sister Mary. By the way, the real-life Mary Ingalls never married and didn't become a school teacher like the TV series portrayed. Mary moved in with Carrie in Keystone, where she suffered a stroke. Mary eventually died of pneumonia on October 20th, 1928, at the age of 63. Just like Grace and Laura, Carrie suffered from diabetes and died of complications from the disease in Keystone, South Dakota on June 2, 1946, at the age of 75. She was not buried next to her husband in Keystone, but in the Ingalls family plot in the De Smet Cemetery. The world probably wouldn't have taken much note of the Ingalls family were it not for the writing talents of Laura Ingalls Wilder, who began writing the Little House book series in 1932. Laura had married Alonzo Wilder in 1885, and they relocated to Mansfield, Missouri, where she lived out the rest of her life, writing the children's books based on her own life experiences. Alonzo died in 1949, leaving Laura a widow for the next 8 years. They were both laid to rest in the Mansfield Cemetery. We checked out the other classrooms in the historic schoolhouse, some of which were displayed as a museum with local historical artifacts. Even though the schoolhouse was built in 1899, it continued serving students until 1988. It's interesting to think that Carrie's 2 stepchildren were educated in these very classrooms. No doubt Carrie herself showed up here from time to time as an involved parent and community member. James Halley, the mercantile owner here in Keystone, where Carrie Ingalls did her trading. James purchased the Keystone Trading Company in 1917 and later renamed it Halley's Store. James Halley was one of the 60 cowboys in Captain Seth Bullock's Cowboy Brigade who rode their horses in the March 1905 inaugural parade of President Teddy Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. Okay, so since we're in a place that celebrates presidents, this bathtub was apparently used by William Howard Taft, who was President of the United States, in 1912 when he came to Prairie, South Dakota. And he was our largest president. So it's a lot bigger than the bathtub that we had in our hotel room. Right here was a picture of Mr. Taft. See how rotund he was. And it says, when he traveled from the White House, a large custom bathtub was installed in places where he'd be staying. This tub came from a large Victorian house which was demolished in the 1970s in Prairie, South Dakota. The president visited State Senator Alfred Burke, who had an apartment in the house at that time, and the bathtubs were left in each place after the president's visit. There is the article that talks about that house coming down.
Hand dryer, old chalk, and
All old school utensils and inkwells, pens,
boxes of chalk.
color chalk.
We still use this type of thing in schools today, but it's not a chalkboard. They're now whiteboards where you use dry erase markers instead of chalk.
You mean they don't use like notepads or iPads and stuff?
Well, they do, but one of the ways that teachers use to find out if, how students can respond is they'll ask a question and they can write stuff out on the whiteboard and show their whiteboard to show that they've understood what's being taught. Well, that's the same concept that these chalkboards.
Anybody heard of that? Dustless crayon? Other classrooms were set up just as the way they appeared decades ago. This school building last housed students in 1988.
1988?
Yeah. Seems that every schoolhouse in the country had a portrait of George Washington hanging on the wall.
Well, that makes sense as to why, if 1988, why they have that metal playground equipment up there.
Looks just like the other room, just about. She's giving us a plug here. She's writing on YouTube. We left the museum and old schoolhouse with a powering sense of nostalgia, and we're eager to check out the old Halley General Store just blocks away, a place where Carrie Ingalls shopped from time to time. Who knows, perhaps Laura Ingalls visited Carrie here in Keystone and ran an errand to the store as well. And right there is Halley's Mercantile Store. It's the same store that Carrie Ingalls did business at here in the historic part of Keystone, which, to be honest, I didn't know they had a historic district. Check out the old gas pump. It's just on the porch. It wasn't here originally, but isn't that cool? Since 1895, and Carrie died in the 1940s. In the early 1920s, the boardwalk of the store witnessed the cavalry from Fort Meade riding in from Sturgis for maneuvers here. The soldiers camped out below the hill containing the schoolhouse as seen here. And since this is the doctor's office that dates back to the 1920s, this is likely a place that Carrie Ingalls would have sought some medical attention as she aged. As always, we appreciate that you've joined us on another journey into the past. History is more important than people realize. It teaches us how we came to be what we are today, and it allows us to learn from our past failures and not to repeat them. Thank you so much.